What if a king prayed so hard for victory? He burned his own empire to the ground. He ruled half the known world, from silver-stuffed vaults in Mexico to blood-soaked fields in Flanders. But behind the velvet curtains of power, Philip II whispered to saints and sharpened his wrath like a blade. Heresy wasn't just treason, it was war, and he swore to crush it with holy fire. The Inquisition wasn't enough. Assassins failed. Armadas sank. Still, he pressed on. Because to Philip, salvation was worth any cost, even if it meant losing everything. His crown, his bloodline, his soul. This isn't history. This is damnation in royal ink. The cathedral bells tolled like a warning. Cold, thunderous, final. In the echoing corridors of the Alcazar of Valladolid, a boy stood motionless beneath the weight of portraits he would one day become. Philip, son of Charles, heir to the world, 10 years old, but already staring through windows like a ghost, silent and severe. He didn't run. He didn't play. He listened, always listening, for the voice of God or the sound of betrayal. They said he barely smiled, that even as a child, his words cut like glass, calculated, sparse, delivered with the gravity of a dying priest. Tutors whispered Latin in his ear before he learned to ride. Imperium signed fine, rule without end. But Philip heard something else in those lines. Not power, burden, the duty to hold back the devil himself. 1527, born in the damp shadows of the Reformation. Europe's altars were bleeding. Monasteries were burning. God had become a weapon. His father, Charles V, was already riding from battlefield to battlefield, armor clashing with scripture, dragging the Holy Roman Empire behind him like a wounded lion. There was no room for softness in his world. And Philip, his only legitimate son, would be forged like iron in the crucible of that war. He was kept apart, too sacred to mingle, too important to fail. Nuns and confessors shaped his conscience. Governors taught him obedience, not affection. He learned to move through rooms without sound, to speak without smiling, to kneel so long in prayer that his knees cracked. Every hour of his day was mapped to perfection: mass, study, silence, repetition. His soul wasn't his own. It belonged to Spain. It belonged to God. Silver poured into Seville like lifeblood from the New World. Coins stamped with the image of Catholic kings, mined by crushed hands in Mexico and Peru. The empire was vast, but restless. Naples moaned under Spanish rule. The Netherlands seethed. The Moors in Granada remembered. All of it, every coin, every cannon, every trembling priest, was now creeping toward his shoulders. One day, the world would kneel before him. But that day would come with fire. He didn't want the crown, not like other princes did. He feared it, and still, he believed it was his curse to bear. There was no questioning it, no rebellion inside him, only obedience to a purpose he did not choose. He was the blade sharpened by his father's hand. By 27, he was already hardened. His father handed him Naples, then Milan, then the Netherlands. Each one a test, each one a taste of blood. He governed with an icy hand, cloaked in silence, surrounded by spies and letters. He trusted no one, not even his own skin. In 1554, he married Mary Tudor of England. It wasn't love. It wasn't even politics. It was war in a wedding dress. Mary was older, haunted, barren, but she was Catholic. And through her, Philip would try to weld England back into the Church's iron grip. He arrived in Winchester with black-robed priests behind him, and suspicion in every English eye. They called him foreign. They called him cursed. But he didn't flinch. He had come to restore the true faith, and he would do it in God's name, or with God's fire. Mary clung to him. He prayed beside her, but avoided her bed. He despised the English court, the smiles that hid daggers, the rumors of plots, the taste of northern heresy in every hall. When the people hissed at his name, he turned his gaze to the crucifix. Let them hate, so long as they obey. That's what mattered. Then came 1556. Charles V, old, broken, weary of battle, laid down his sword and vanished into a monastery. In the flickering torchlight of Brussels, the ceremony began. Philip stood in silence as his father wept, his trembling hand handing over the weight of a world. Spain, Naples, Sicily, the Netherlands, the Americas, the Philippines, named in his honor, still nothing more than jungle and storm. All his now, all of it. But glory has teeth, and it bites deep. His father's armor didn't fit his frame. The empire was vast, but cracked. Silver was rotting the economy. The army bled gold by the hour. Heresy spread like plague through Protestant veins. And Philip, standing at the head of it all, had only one thought: preserve the faith, no matter the cost. He didn't drink. He didn't laugh. He rarely touched another's hand. He wrote letters until his fingers bled. Thousands, tens of thousands, poring over decisions with fanatical care, lost in scrolls of politics, maps stained with tears, edicts laced with fear. And always, at the heart of it, one obsession: God must win, or Spain must burn. He was no Charles. He didn't gallop into battle. He ruled from shadows, behind veils, through silence and steel. His palace, El Escorial, was already rising in his mind, not a court of pleasure, but a monastery carved in stone, shaped like a gridiron, echoing the martyrdom of St. Lawrence. A king's heart bound to the altar. Even in power, he dressed like a monk. Black robes, cold hands, pale skin that almost glowed beneath candlelight. Those who met him felt a chill in the air. Some said he never blinked. He wasn't cruel for sport. He was cruel for salvation. Every execution, every law, every whisper into the ears of bishops and generals carried the same command: hold the line. Against Satan, against chaos, against the death of Christendom. But storms were already gathering. France bristled. England seethed. The Netherlands boiled beneath the surface. The silver that once fed Spain now poisoned it. The empire was gold on the outside and dust within. And Philip, the Catholic son of empire, heir to the ashes of a dying world, tightened his grip. He would never let go. The wind carried the stench of burning flesh through the narrow streets of Valladolid. Smoke curled like black prayers into a pale morning sky. In the center of the square, a wooden stake cracked and hissed, wrapped in flame and limbs and screams. The crowd was silent. Even the children did not speak. They watched the fire climb the man's legs, watched him cry out, not for life, but for forgiveness. He had read the wrong Bible, in the wrong tongue, under the wrong king. Philip watched from a curtained window, unmoved. It was 1559, 2 years after he became king of Spain. 3 years since his father's trembling hands had passed him the weight of the world. Now, the weight was fire. The throne was a furnace, and heresy was infection. It must be burned, root and nerve and bone. He ruled a broken age, where men no longer feared sin, where priests were butchered in France, and churches gutted in England. In the north, the Netherlands boiled with silent rage, merchant cities humming with Calvinist sermons, passed from mouth to mouth like contraband. In Geneva, men wrote doctrines with knives instead of ink. In London, a Protestant queen now sat on the throne. Elizabeth, cold-eyed and smiling, heretics in her court, Catholic blood on her hands. Her very name was a thorn in Philip's throat. He had tried through marriage. He had wed her sister, Mary Tudor, his second cousin, the Catholic queen with trembling hands and wombs that held only ghosts. He had sat beside her in candlelit halls, kissed her out of duty, held her as she wept for a child that never came. Then, in 1558, she died. Alone, forgotten, Elizabeth took the crown, and with it, the English soul. Philip did not cry. He turned instead to punishment, to order, to silence. In Spain, the Inquisition swelled like a black tide. Censors pulled forbidden texts from bookshelves like organs from the body. Printers vanished. Whispered prayers to Protestant saints were enough to disappear a family overnight. No trial, no mercy, faith or fire. There would be no middle ground. And still it spread. Still, the cancer crept across his empire like frost under skin. So he fixed his eyes on the Netherlands. To Philip, they were infected, ungrateful, unholy. These were not Spaniards. They drank too much, questioned too loudly, prayed with their eyes open. And worst of all, they read. Dutch merchants and noblemen passed banned books hand to hand, some printed in Geneva, others smuggled through English ports. Words sharper than swords. Sola scriptura, sola fide, faith alone, scripture alone, words that mocked every altar in Spain. In 1566, it exploded. Iconoclasts stormed Catholic churches across Flanders. Statues of the Virgin were shattered, altars torn apart, stained glass burst under stones and shouts. It was not rebellion, It was desecration. It was war on God. Philip's response was not diplomatic. He sent the Duke of Alba. Iron face, iron heart, iron will. Alba crossed the Pyrenees with 10,000 men and a silence colder than steel. When he arrived, he did not negotiate. He built gallows in public squares. He opened trials that ended in fire. The Council of Troubles, they called it. But the Dutch named it something else, the Council of Blood. They weren't wrong. Between 1567 and 1573, more than 1,000 executions. Nobles, priests, merchants, students. No one was above suspicion. Bodies hung from bridges like fruit. Heads lined city gates. Blood blackened the cobblestones. Alba reported each sentence to Philip personally, detailed, neat, measured. Each death a thread in a tapestry of fear. And still, Philip prayed. Every morning, every night. His lips moved over rosaries like beads of bone. He saw himself not as a tyrant, but a savior. Not a king, but a hammer in the hands of God. He would crush heresy, not with words, but with will. Not with tolerance, but with steel. He built El Escorial as proof. Not a palace, a warning. A granite heart carved into the mountain, shaped like a gridiron in honor of St. Lawrence, burned alive for his faith. A monastery, a tomb, a machine for prayer. Its halls echoed with silence, its walls black with discipline. Philip lived within it like a monk, walking barefoot, rooms unheated, food plain. The king of half the world sleeping beside relics, his crown resting near a crucifix soaked in the blood of saints. He called it holy. Others called it haunted. But Spain was not silent. Beneath the surface, another fire was waiting. Far from Brussels, far from London, Granada, land of the Moriscos, the Muslim converts, the ones who knelt but never forgot. Their prayers were in Arabic, their weddings in secret, their food touched by memory. Philip saw danger in their every shadow. In 1568, they rose. Torches in the hills, blades in the night. They slaughtered priests. They defaced churches. They called on Allah in valleys Philip had sworn to Christ. He answered with war. No parley, no truce, just iron, just blood. For 4 years, the Alpujarras burned. Spanish troops razed villages, butchered children, salted the earth. Moriscos were hunted like wolves, slaughtered, enslaved, or deported by the thousands. Mothers drowned their sons to spare them the agony of confession. Men hanged themselves from trees rather than speak the words, I convert. Philip ordered it all. He never flinched. Because to him, they were not people. They were threats to eternity. He would not let Islam return to Spain. He would not let the Virgin be mocked. He would not let Christ be driven from his throne by heretics, infidels, or rebels. Faith was not a suggestion. It was command. And for Philip, command meant obedience. No matter the screams, no matter the smoke, no matter the blood soaking the stone floors of El Escorial like wine in a forgotten chalice. But something had shifted. His empire was bleeding from 1,000 wounds. England cursed his name. France toyed with heretics. The Netherlands had not broken, only hardened. And still he pressed on. Not with doubt, not with regret, but with the cold, eternal confidence of a man who would rather be right in hell than wrong in heaven. Because Philip II wasn't trying to save the world. He was trying to save its soul. A bullet tore through his chest at close range. He staggered backward, hands clenching at the black wound blooming beneath his ribs. Blood soaked the folds of his coat as he crumpled against the wall of his own home, eyes wide with something colder than pain. The assassin stood just feet away, panting, shaking, pistol still warm. William of Orange was dying. It was July 10th, 1584. And for Philip II of Spain, it was a prayer answered. He had waited 16 years for this. Not for vengeance. Not for politics. For God. The heretic prince, the rebel ghost, the man who mocked Christ and defied empire, now silenced. Philip's enemies called it murder. He called it justice. Divine, perfect, final. But even as William's body was dragged away, even as his house echoed with screams and shouts, something stirred beneath the surface. Not peace. Not surrender. Something far worse. Resistance had learned to breathe without a head. The Netherlands had already been choking on blood since 1568. Towns burned, priests hanged, rebels hunted through frozen marshes and snow-covered forests. They called it war. But war needs rules. This had none. It was fire let loose. Cities besieged for weeks, then sacked in hours. Children crucified on church doors. Wives thrown from windows. Altars broken and smeared with filth. And through it all, Philip watched from El Escorial, stone-faced, fasting, whispering to saints long dead. He read every report, every skirmish, every execution order. He saw the empire like a chessboard lit by candlelight, his bishops, his captains, his coins. But the board was cracking beneath his fingers. Soldiers went unpaid. Ships were abandoned mid-siege. The treasury bled silver like a man bleeding from the throat. Inflation turned bread into gold. Farmers starved in fields where armies had marched. Still he fought. Still he refused compromise. Because this was not about land. It was about souls. There were whispers in the palace. Whispers that Philip had lost sense. That his wars were holy in name only. That he had traded reason for fire. But no one said it aloud. Not in Spain. Not where the Inquisition burned beneath every floorboard. Back in 1571, when the sun still seemed to shine on his empire, a different war had raged, not in the damp streets of the Low Countries, but on the black waves of the Mediterranean. The Turks were coming. Ottoman galleys darkened the sea like a swarm. The crescent pressed hard against Europe's throat, and Philip sent his answer with sails and prayer. Lepanto. The name hung in the air like incense, like thunder. October 7th, 1571. Off the coast of Greece, Catholic ships met Muslim fleets in a storm of splintered wood, severed limbs, cannon roars, and drowning cries. It wasn't a battle. It was a reckoning. The sea turned red. The wind carried screams for miles. 30,000 Ottoman dead. Hundreds of Christian slaves freed from the hulls of enemy ships. It was victory. Holy absolute. Philip never saw it. He wasn't there. He didn't need to be. He lit a candle. He offered thanks. He called it a sign. But back home, Spain twisted in silence. The war in the Netherlands dragged on. Every victory melted into more rebellion. Every city pacified turned restless within weeks. Philip's letters grew colder. His eyes dimmer. He trusted fewer and fewer men. Spies multiplied. They sat in taverns, in confessionals, in the bedrooms of nobility. One word of dissent could mean torture. One misstep could mean fire. In 1573, the Duke of Alba, his iron executioner, was recalled, exhausted, hated, and spent. The Council of Blood had not broken the Dutch. It had forged them. Still, Philip plotted. Not just in the Netherlands. Not just in Spain. He reached into France, feeding gold and whispers to the Catholic League, fanning the flames of civil war. Protestant Huguenots and Catholic nobles tore each other apart, while Philip watched from across the Pyrenees, hands clasped in solemn delight. He sent priests and coin to England, too, to undermine Elizabeth, to bring Mary Stuart to power, to return that cursed island to the church. Assassins tried and failed. Plots collapsed. Elizabeth grew colder, sharper, deadlier. But Philip never stopped, because the fight wasn't against monarchs. It was against sin, and sin wore many crowns. In 1580, fate blinked. Portugal's king died without an heir. The House of Avis collapsed, and Philip, son of Charles, grandson of the Catholic kings, made his move. By blood, by force, by the quiet grinding of diplomacy, he took it. Portugal fell under his shadow. The Iberian Peninsula was his. Its navy, its colonies, its gold, its glory. For a moment, the empire seemed to breathe again. From Lisbon to Manila, from Antwerp to Lima, one monarch ruled them all. One flag, one creed, one church. But glory, too, carries rot. The seas churned with piracy. English privateers stole gold with smiles and cannon smoke. The Portuguese nobles simmered with silent fury. In the Netherlands, the death of William only hardened the revolt. And in Spain, the people cracked. Prices soared. Wages froze. Men returned from war maimed and hungry. Towns emptied. The fields went untilled. Famine gnawed. Disease followed. Riots shook cities where the banners still flew. Philip watched it all from behind stone walls. Writing, always writing. Thousands of letters. Orders. Pleas. Threats. He didn't sleep. He didn't laugh. He rarely left El Escorial. His skin turned sickly pale. His eyes sank into shadows. His fingers twitched from ink and prayer. But still he believed. Every step of the rebellion. Every heretic prince. Every failed plot. Every mutiny. Every act of defiance. All of it was a test, a crucible, and Philip, the Catholic king, would endure it, would crush it, would bleed for it. Because what was an empire, if not a sacrifice? He had seen victory at sea and ruin on land. He had swallowed crowns and spit out coins. He had watched saints burned and heretics crowned. He had known silence and fury, triumph and failure. And now, his enemy had fallen. William of Orange lay dead, but the flame kept burning. August 1588. The air stood still. No birds, no waves, no sound. Just the oppressive weight of something vast, invisible, waiting to strike. Off the coast of Lisbon, anchored in rows like a floating fortress, the Spanish Armada sat. 130 ships, 8,000 sailors, 19,000 soldiers, and 2,400 cannons aimed at Protestant England. But it was not steel or gunpowder that bound them together. It was something far more dangerous. Faith, obsession, a king's whispered belief that God himself had written the wind in Spain's favor. Inside the stone walls of El Escorial, Philip II knelt alone, his back stiff with age, his breath sharp with purpose. Candles flickered across rows of crucifixes and skulls, silent witnesses to his vow. England had mocked the Holy Church. Elizabeth had spilled sacred blood. Mary, Queen of Scots, his Catholic cousin, had been executed like a criminal. It could not go unanswered. He wasn't planning a war. He was summoning judgment. Every prayer he spoke that night was a sentence passed. Every Latin chant was a blade unsheathed. The Armada wasn't just a fleet. It was an act of divine correction, thunder carved into wood and sail. He called it the enterprise of England. But in his heart, it was something more, a crusade wrapped in storm clouds, a holy reckoning riding on waves. In the harbors, banners of the Virgin fluttered beside cannons. Chaplains marched alongside mariners, blessing salt water and gunpowder alike. Drums beat in rhythm with church bells. Soldiers whispered the names of saints before sleep. The sea was their altar, their mission sacred. Even the weathered captains, men used to rot and rebellion, spoke with reverence. They weren't sailing for gold or glory. They were sailing for God's justice. But justice doesn't come with a compass. And heaven is silent when you ask it for directions. From the beginning, something was wrong. Delays, arguments, sudden fevers. Ships needed repairs. Supplies vanished. Orders changed. The Duke of Medina Sidonia, a cautious noble untested in naval war, was made commander, not because of talent, but because he was loyal. And loyalty was the only thing Philip trusted. Not skill, not intuition, not even the sea. Still, the Armada launched. Late, hesitant, but proud. On July 21st, 1588, it sailed north with hulls full of blessings and bellies full of fear. Across the channel, Elizabeth waited. Her ships were smaller, faster, hungrier. English captains like Francis Drake had raided Spanish ports for years. They knew how to bleed giants. They didn't fear Spain. They hated it. And they were ready to strike. The first clash came off Plymouth. Spanish formations held. But English fire ships came next, ghost vessels lit with flame, drifting silently toward the anchored Armada. Panic spread like plague. Chains were cut. Anchors lost. The Spanish scattered to escape the floating inferno. Discipline collapsed. Order broke. That night, under black sky and red flame, the holy mission trembled. Then the winds changed. August 8th, off Gravelines. The battle hit like a scream. English guns roared with terrifying precision. Spanish ships struggled to regroup. Their tight crescent formation shattered into chaos. Smoke rolled across the water like a curtain of judgment. Cannons blasted hulls into splinters. Men drowned in prayer and salt. Command signals vanished in the storm. Medina Sidonia watched in horror, unable to lead, unable to retreat, unable to believe. Philip was 1,000 miles away, but he already felt the chill in his bones. When the battle ended, there was no final charge, no last stand, just silence, wreckage, and blood swirling into the sea. The Armada limped north, around Scotland, toward Ireland, toward death. Storms struck with unnatural fury, masts snapped like bones, sails torn like scripture in a heretic's hands. Ships disappeared. Hundreds of men washed ashore in foreign lands, starving, half-naked, hunted. Some were hanged. Others were butchered. Few ever made it home. Of the 130 ships that had left Spain, fewer than half returned. And those that did were scarred, broken, hollowed by defeat. But Philip didn't cry. He didn't rage. He didn't apologize. He folded his hands. It was the will of God, he said. Not failure. Not miscalculation. Not his own stubborn blindness. No, it was divine mystery. A holy riddle beyond human grasp. His empire had burned billions of ducats, buried thousands of men, and torn its prestige to shreds. But he clung to the illusion that heaven had spoken through silence. Inside Spain, the facade cracked. The treasury bled. Armories stood half empty. Morale plummeted. Veterans cursed under their breath. Merchants demanded repayment. Priests whispered doubts behind pulpits. The people, once inflamed with holy pride, began to stare at their king with something colder. Not hatred, not yet, but exhaustion, the kind that rots kingdoms from within. England grew bolder. Elizabeth stood taller. The Protestant cause surged. And still Philip refused compromise. He tightened the grip on his rosary, strengthened the Inquisition, drowned dissent in incense and ash. Every question was heresy. Every loss, a test. Every breath, a trial sent by God. His court grew quieter. Ministers walked with heavier steps. Letters arrived slower, fuller of warnings than victories. And Philip, that pale ghost in black robes, rode into the night. Always writing, always planning. For he still believed. He had to. He told himself the next crusade would succeed. That England could still fall. That God's silence was not abandonment, but delay. Even now, even as the world tilted away from him, he clung to one thing. Faith, so sharp it cut through reality. Faith, so blind it set an empire ablaze. Faith, as armor, sword, and shroud. The air inside El Escorial hung still. Not quiet, dead. Curtains remained drawn no matter the hour. Candles burned, but the light refused to dance. The great stone mausoleum of kings had begun to whisper. It knew who was next. In a chamber lined with crucifixes, parchments, and the odor of rotting flesh, a man once feared across continents could no longer rise from bed without screaming. Philip II, once Lord of the Americas, master of half of Europe, ruler beneath God alone, was now imprisoned in his own bones. His legs were swollen grotesquely from gout. His hands trembled with each stroke of the quill. Yet still he wrote. Letters to generals, letters to inquisitors, letters to bishops. Letters soaked in agony. Letters smeared with blood when his fingers cracked open from strain. It was 1590. France burned in civil war, and Philip, barely breathing, barely sane, refused to let it fall into Protestant hands. He funded the Catholic League with money Spain no longer had. The treasury was hollow, yet he bled it dry anyway. Clergy marched, banners raised, swords drawn, all while their king lay in bed, wrapped in cloth soaked with pus. His every movement a prayer, his every groan a plea for salvation. Outside his fortress palace, Spain convulsed. Fields died. Crops failed. Hunger rolled across Castile like a fog. Children begged with bloated bellies in the shadow of churches. The empire that once dazzled the world with silver from the New World now defaulted again, bankrupt, broken, bleeding. Ships rotted in harbors. Soldiers deserted. The people murmured treason beneath their breath, but no one dared say it aloud. Philip would not bend. Not to heresy. Not to doubt. Not even to death. Every morning he ordered Mass, whether he could sit upright or not. Priests stood beside his bed and whispered Latin into his ears as he winced in pain. Some days he'd faint halfway through. Other days, he insisted on Holy Communion, though the bread stuck to his dry mouth and the wine made him choke. Still, he insisted. If the devil had come for him, Philip would die with God's name in his throat. Letters arrived from the Netherlands. More revolt, more loss, more blood. He had once tried to drown their rebellion in fire. Now the Dutch spat in his face. Still he sent men. Still he signed death warrants from bed, his hand shaking so violently a clerk had to steady it. Heretics must burn. Apostates must be crushed. If his empire shattered in the process, so be it. Better to rule ashes in the name of Christ than kneel before the false light of tolerance. At night, his screams echoed through El Escorial. They said it was the gout, but the servants knew better. He muttered names in his sleep: Elizabeth, William of Orange, Henry of Navarre. Enemies who refused to die, who haunted him in dreams, who laughed at his ruin. He ordered incense burned constantly, though it did nothing to mask the stench of his own flesh. His body had become a battlefield, just like his empire. By 1596, his fingers were curled and knotted, barely able to hold anything. He dictated now, sometimes fevered, sometimes clear. He issued instructions to burn more heretics in Toledo. He asked for accounts of priests in the Philippines. He demanded to know if Henry IV of France had truly converted. When told yes, he did not smile. "Too late," he whispered. "Too late." But he still approved more funds for war. God required victory, even if Spain had nothing left to give. Portugal, which he had once claimed as a crown jewel, began slipping from his grasp. Its nobles whispered rebellion. Its merchants cursed Madrid. But Philip's eyes were fixed elsewhere. He had not come this far to give up the soul of Europe. If France fell to Protestantism, the gates of hell would swing wide. And if that meant emptying Spain's vaults again, letting his people starve, and dying in rags, so be it. By 1597, he could no longer walk. His legs had swollen to the size of tree trunks. Blackened sores opened and festered. The surgeons cut into him without mercy, slicing rotted flesh from living skin. He did not scream. He bit down on a rosary and whispered the names of saints. Blood ran down his thighs. The sheets soaked through. Still, he asked for his crucifix to be brought closer. "I must see him," he said. "I must." Servants wept behind doors. The King of Spain, the most powerful monarch of the Catholic world, was wasting into something ghostly. His breath rattled like wind through broken armor. His voice came out in gasps, yet his mind clung to one obsession: the war for God's name. He was writing orders even as his skin began to slough off. Priests read him messages from commanders, but his eyes could no longer follow the words. "More troops," he said. "Send more." They told him they couldn't. Spain had nothing left. His response was silence. Then he asked for confession. September 13th, 1598. The pain no longer flared. It consumed. His bed had become a pulpit, a prison, and a grave. El Escorial's walls closed in. He ordered his children to leave the room. He didn't want them to see him broken. He asked only for his crucifix. He held it against his chest. It stuck to his skin. His final request: to be dressed in the habit of a barefoot Franciscan monk. He died hours later, alone, burning with fever, clutching Christ. And still the wars raged on. Still the debts grew. Still the empire trembled. But Philip II had already gone where kings cannot retreat. He had given everything: blood, coin, soul, not for power, not for glory, but for faith.